In the world of video games, there is a wealth of adventure that can captivate us with its incredible stories, its lovable cast of characters, and its magnificently realized worlds. The world of JRPGs has always been heralded as a dense genre in crafting magnificent worlds, characters, and fantastical adventures. However, over the years, we've seen a change, a shift, in terms of approaches to storytelling. There has been a change of the guard from what the iconic flagships of this genre, such as Final Fantasy, Phantasy Star, and Suikoden, were to the presence that they have today. We can see an evolution and a shift with this genre, however, with games such as Persona taking the limelight and pushing the space forward. And whilst these games are heavy-hitting and fantastic in their own regards, the whimsical, expansive, open worlds that once were feel like a thing of the past. Xenoblade Chronicles is a series that tells a rich narrative reminiscent of the glory days of Squaresoft, but manages to captivate and enthrall you with its stunning size, scale, and depth that occupies its open world. Xenoblade Chronicles poses many questions and provides a profound and riveting narrative full of memorable characters and an incredible universe. Simply put, Xenoblade Chronicles is an outstanding game. This video will begin a multi-part project delving into the beauty of this series and what makes it so incredible. From its clever gameplay systems to its rich stories, Xenoblade Chronicles is one of the best experiences I've had with an RPG over the past few years, and it's one that really sticks with you once you get a feel for its gameplay and you dive deeper into its story. It's a game that wowed me, and now having played all 3 games plus their expansions, I'm here to tell you why this series is one you should really give a try, and a good chance at that. So with that out of the way, let's dive into the retrospective of Xenoblade Chronicles. Before we get into the many different moving parts of Xenoblade Chronicles, I'd briefly like to discuss the development of Xenoblade, which would have a rocky development and release. The development of Xenoblade Chronicles began in 2006, and there's an important thing to touch on here with Monolith Soft as a studio. Many of the people working at Monolith Soft are long-term veterans in the space, having worked at Square and worked on many different iconic titles such as Final Fantasy and the cult classic Xenogears, which, as a fun fact, was an original concept idea for Final Fantasy VII before becoming its own standalone game. Monolith Soft was founded in 1999 to provide experiences that they wanted to make, as Square's business approach to game development would see a change in the early 2000s, with a focus on capitalizing on existing universes and IP rather than creating new stories from the ground up. This business decision would lead Monolith Soft to form a partnership with Namco. This partnership would last throughout the early 2000s and see the release of the Xenosaga trilogy and the Baten Kaitos duology. However, given the sales of Xenosaga's 3rd entry and the recent merger between Bandai and Namco, things started to shift and drift between Monolith and Namco. This drift between Namco and Monolith would see them now move to their most recent and current publisher, Nintendo. Nintendo would acquire over 90% of Monolith Soft's shares and have Monolith begin working as a third-party studio supporting many of Nintendo's first-party games, alongside many of their independent IPs. Monolith Soft as a studio since its inception has always held this principle of developing an experience that they want to make and hiring new talent to take on these ambitious titles. Xenoblade was initially considered as a release for the GameCube. However, due to the recent release of the Wii, Xenoblade would find itself on Nintendo's new family console. The game would be developed by a team of around roughly 70 people, led by the director Tatsuya Takahashi. Takahashi said the game was designed as an open-world RPG that fully uses the Wii's capabilities and hardware. The game would see a different gameplay focus to many of its contemporaries at the time, with a strong focus on real-time combat, which would be a departure from what's conventionally a staple of many Japanese role-playing games. The concept and shift in direction for Xenoblade Chronicles came from Tetsuya Takahashi, who one day, whilst waiting for a train, imagined this idea of these 2 titans fighting, and with that, the building blocks for Xenoblade 1. He wanted this open world to explore and vast lands inhabited by giant creatures and epic battles. Takahashi would use and look at the anatomy when designing and conceiving ideas for for these titans, and trying to consider the different types of weather and biomes that would inhabit the different parts of the body. Hence why the Machna forest is on the back, and the more shaded areas like the Bionis' locked positions, like the Valak Mountains being snowy and an Arctic plain to explore. Much thought and detail went into the building of the world of Xenoblade Chronicles. There were even areas that the team would work on, such as the Bionis' shoulder, which would not make it into the game's final release, but would resurface in the 2020 expansion Future Connected, which we will discuss later in the video. Initially, this new game would be called Monado, Beginning of the World, but was later changed to Xenoblade to honor Takahashi's previous works on the Xenogears and Xenosaga series. The game would release in Japan in 2010 and see a European release later. However, it would remain unconfirmed whether or not the game would release in North America. At the time, it seemed like Nintendo North America was alluding to the fact Xenoblade may not see a release in the region. Nintendo's silence and fans' uncertainty kicked off a campaign called Operation Rainfall. The desired goal was to raise awareness around 3 potential Wii releases that were not localized. These games consisted of The Last Story, Pandora's Tower, and of course, Xenoblade Chronicles. It would take some time, but on April 6, 2012, Xenoblade Chronicles would hit shelves in North America and see 2 releases throughout the decade to come, with a 3DS port and a definitive edition for the Switch, which will be the point of focus for today's video primarily. And it would become an iconic series for those who love JRPGs or Nintendo games. It was a long-awaited battle of attrition, but now here we are, and we have our copy of Xenoblade Chronicles to dive into. The story of Xenoblade Chronicles establishes the ever-ongoing war between the 2 titans, the Bionis and the Mechonis. The narrative puts us in the shoes of Shulk, a curious character who enjoys building and tinkering with mechanical scrap. He is currently trying to unveil the mysteries behind this mysterious blade called the Monado, whilst chilling with his childhood friends, Ryan and Fiora, in his downtime. Xenoblade's story will kick off into full swing when the age-old enemy, the Mechon, attacked the group of friends' home, Colony 9. Tragedy strikes when the Mechon with a face takes Fiora's life and thrusts Shulk and Ryan on a quest to stop and destroy the Mechon. The crazy thing about Xenoblade's story is where you start versus where you end up. It is a drastic shift from what you would have considered the original idea of the game to be. And this story is delivered and mainly explained super well. It subverts your expectations in many ways, where some of the reveals and predictions in one way can feel like, yeah, I really called that, but for all the reasons you didn't think of. The game takes many twists and turns and unveils the world slowly, but takes the proper steps to lock all the components into its rich narrative together. The reveals never feel contrived or out of place, but are more cleverly written as if they were hiding in plain sight for you to see. Despite the long runtime JRPGs tend to gravitate towards, Xenoblade Chronicles feels like a game that replaying it could really provide a whole new perspective to the experience. It follows a strong cast of characters from different communities found throughout your adventure, and as you explore this world, you also explore these characters on a more personal level through many of the different gameplay elements that play out through sequences called Heart to Hearts. And Xenoblade has a fantastic system called the Affinity chart, which we'll dive into more in depth later on in this retrospective, but for now, let's just say that this game tackles many different aspects of storytelling, both on an intimate level and on a more broad level with the world itself. As for now though, we'll be diving into the themes found throughout Xenoblade Chronicles' story, which are phenomenal and are so cleverly explored. They are integrated so cohesively into this game and the gameplay elements, and also the open world design of the game. So now we'll be diving into those, and with that, the spoiler territory for Xenoblade. So if you still need to play the game, please skip ahead to the timestamp that I'll put on screen, or just come back to the video once you've played the game, because seriously, these next parts that I'm going to discuss are worth experiencing for yourself. Anyways, with that out of the way, let's dive into it. The story of Xenoblade Chronicles tackles many concepts centered around control, fate, and destiny, and it is through this lens that many of the subsequent themes stem from. But one of the most potent of Xenoblade's themes is how it handles grief. The party members and heroes of this story here in Xenoblade are all vibrant and lovable characters in their own respects, But what binds and glues these characters together and brings this whole group as a collective together is their shared experiences of grief and the ideals for a better future without conflict and loss. Whether it is the shared loss of Fiora that links Shulk, Rhine and Dunbarn, or Sharla's missing love, Gadout, or Melia's perilous state of her people. All of these heroes are bounded and bonded by grief in some way, and it is this connection that drives both of them and the journey. The relationships between each of these characters elevate many of the heavy-hitting moments to be all the more impactful, with the context of each of these characters' respective grief, growth, and motivations. Many of these scenes and these characters are perceived through different angles and lenses, as the main cast are explored through both the main story, but are also built upon in these sequences referred to as heart-to-hearts, which we'll dive into more thoroughly later, but these little sequences give a bit of an insight into each character through a conversation, and really start to express the character's drive, motives, and feelings. And it really is in these moments, these little downtime moments, where you really start to understand the workings of each of the main cast and grow to love them even more. I would say one good example of a developing relationship throughout the story of Xenoblade is one that is shared between Sharla and Rhine. Throughout the journey, you can see that these two characters grow closer and more dependable on each other, and you can see that Sharla really does see a lot of Gadout through Rhine. And it's never really too in your face with any of the methods how they portray this, but they do it subtly and in a nice way that really does respect the story. And there's a lot of these little moments that add a lot of charm to the character and the overall experience. It really does feel like when writing this game, they really did think out the relationships between these characters and make them feel like they develop over the course of the story. And that is just one more subtle side example that I can point to. The most easiest one that you could identify when you start the game is the kind of revenge plot that is taking place where both Shulk and Rhine want to destroy the Mechonis and want to get back at the Mechon for the loss of Fiora. This shared united front of grief for vengeance is one thing that really kicks off the overall story for Xenoblade. What's more interesting and revealed later in the story is the parallels between Shulk's quest for revenge and Egil, the main antagonist early on in the story. The parallels in this game are through the shared grief of their people, the bloodshed and betrayal. It is something that further emphasizes the likeness of the life that inhabit both the Bionis and the Mechonis. The objectives of Shulk and Egil at a point in time are fairly similar, and Egil serves as a duality to the representation of war on both sides of the battlefield, and that they aren't so different. That grief and loss impacts both sides participating in war. Xenoblade makes excellent use of this, and in the end shows that both of these people, Shulk and Egil, have a sort of unison before revealing the game's real antagonist, which we are going to dive into now with the next theme. Where I would say one of the most strongest opening themes that kicks off and leads the journey for Xenoblade is grief, where it ultimately ends up, and what is the big overarching theme of Xenoblade is fate. The centerpiece of Xenoblade Chronicles' story is revolved around fate and destiny, the will to change the future. So, the big main theme that we'll be diving into right now is one that really takes part at the forefront of Xenoblade's later part of the game, and that is the idea of free will versus fate. So, how does this theme work within Xenoblade? Well, it was a big unraveling, that moment when you find out the true nature of the Bionis, more importantly, the god of the Bionis, Zanza. The evolving story of Xenoblade really does begin to take form in its final acts. This game is like a roller coaster ride that ultimately culminates in this battle between the life of the Bionis and Zanza, the god that is the Bionis. The relationship between the people and their omnipotent creator. Xenoblade's story is centered around the concept of fate and destiny, the notion that nothing is predetermined, more than those with the will to change it and carve out a path with their own desire. Zanza serves as the perfect antithesis to this notion. As revealed late into the game, Zanza has planned the outcome, and the outcome have all been set in his favor. Yet, in the closing act, in some anime fashion, this grand ideology pits the concept of the human spirit, determination, and a world without gods against its creator. It's unbelievably hype. It's a great way and conclusion to wrap up this game and close out one of the biggest themes that runs in the game, the idea of fate, changing the future, the whole concept of the Monado, this weapon that you've been using to bend time and fate and outcomes to your will throughout this 80-hour adventure. There is something so special about how Xenoblade cleverly plays between the themes of fate and free will. From the visions, the central theme of changing the future, the endless war, and the fate of the High Entia, all derived from the hubris and control of a world's creator. The finale of this story is our heroes fighting for humanity and freedom against control and this predetermined rules of the world's god Zanza. At its core, the level of thematic beauty that is defying your creator and seizing your destiny is underpinned significantly throughout the theming of Xenoblade Chronicles. It permeates throughout the whole game from its cutscenes and gameplay, and it only enriches the game on a replay. At its core, Xenoblade Chronicles is about defying the predetermined future and paving your own destiny. There is no other form of plot device that encapsulates and handles this as brilliantly as the Monado does. It is the central driver guiding Shulk and the gang throughout the journey, but is ultimately leading them down a path that is already written. One thing about Xenoblade Chronicles is how fearless it is when diving into this universe, character, and ideas. It is an RPG that brings the atmosphere, thematic beats, and more profound concepts that were popularized by many games, most notably Final Fantasy and, more importantly, Xenogears in the 90s. But more importantly, Xenoblade harkens back to its root in the Xeno series, exploring philosophical questions and ideas. But it is special to me for a game that released in 2010 that saw a definitive remaster in 2020, Xenoblade still feels like a form of storytelling from another time, yet still provides a fresh and unique way to tell that form of story, and I really adore it for that. Okay, so with all of that said, let's just take a moment. Can we just discuss the feeling that you get when being returned to the title screen after finishing a Xenoblade game? It is such an impactful moment, and I've been thinking about this ever since I finished the first Xenoblade game and then all the sequential mainline games afterwards. And I was like, what is it about this that just really hits so hard every time? And I think for me, the big thing is just that music coming in, that main theme from when you first loaded up the game, but seeing that first image on screen to the final one, it is like a story within and of itself, the end of the journey. It is like the first time you log in, you're at this starting point, and then you kick off the journey and go on the Xenoblade experience. And then you're always greeted with this splash screen that is telling the story from its conclusion, a good endpoint. And Xenoblade 1 has this incredible brief insight into the world that our heroes fought for. They're all just sitting there in Colony 9, just chilling, having a good time and living. It is something magical. It's like everything you fought for throughout this journey, the whole adventure itself, has come to this conclusion where you've seen all the efforts come to fruition. This happy ending living on through the title screen. It's just the music playing encapsulates a different sense of feeling, and I don't know if I'm getting too deep on all of this, but it's just so visually surreal, and the music itself is just so grand. It just overwhelms me with feelings every time I load up the game since finishing it just to check it out and just dive back in. I don't know, tell me what you guys think. It is an incredible feeling, and it's one thing that I feel not many games are able to really capture once completing it. It's not that sense of emptiness after playing a long game, but a sense of fulfillment and satisfaction that you've completed a journey in a way. Anyway, let me know what you guys think down in the comments, and we'll move on now to the next topic and theme within Xenoblade Chronicles. The third and final theme that I'd like to talk about in this video regarding Xenoblade is the concept that stands out to me being technology versus nature. It is told both in a subtle manner but also explicitly conveyed through the story. It can be most easily expressed through simply looking at the designs of the two titans. The Bionis is this representation of nature with its, grassy plains, snowy mountains, and its beautiful, lush environments. Whereas the Mechonis is this more sterile looking mechanical futuristic machine, and it really is the representation of technology. This is so cleverly told through just visuals alone that it also lends really well to the actual story at play here, as these two titans are in contrast to each other in both concept, as nature and machine technology are usually at two opposite ends of the spectrum. So are these two titans at war. But not only that, it is also life versus machine. With these titans representing these themes, it does stand more to reason that many of the different cities and ecosystems as well that you explore throughout this game will also illustrate these themes. Monolith Soft goes to great lengths to create these environments that reflect these themes. The world of Xenoblade is so cleverly crafted, and this technology versus nature theme is running so seamlessly in conjunction with many of the more obvious themes of war and conflict that are playing out, which endlessly wages on between these titans in the world of Xenoblade 1. The world of Xenoblade shows many different races that live and fight, their meanings, what they fight for, what they stand for, their communities, the people that inhabit these worlds. Still, ultimately, throughout this story, both sides wage war for peace and harmony, and whilst they are contrasted thematically, there is a level of connection and unity that can be found in this natural sense between both parties that is only really established and identified towards the later acts of the game. I just think it is so well done that they were able to come up with this concept and this idea in such a beautiful way that works both in its visual representation, but also plays into this thematic tone that has been set throughout the game. Let me know what you guys think regarding the themes in Xenoblade. There is a lot here to unpack, but overall there is so much here that just works so well in conjunction with one another, and it just neatly wraps this really cleverly crafted story so well together that just makes it feel like it's so obvious, but it isn't really obvious to you until you've seen it through to the end. And it really is a game that caught me off guard and is probably one of the better JRPGs that I've played in a while. So with that out of the way, let's discuss the gameplay for Xenoblade. One significant deviation that Xenoblade Chronicles takes from many other RPGs is moving away from the more turn-based style combat, but in an exciting way that makes positioning and moving around and using different abilities still have a strategic aspect. These abilities that you use in Xenoblade are referred to as arts, and each character has a particular art that plays into their overarching class that each character can use in battle. This approach to combat it was still relatively new at the time in 2010, and I still haven't really seen anyone copy or evolve the Xenoblade formula. One interesting aspect of combat in Xenoblade is just how you can encourage your teammates and boost the overall morale of your party. You can also warn your party members as well through the use of visions, which we'll touch on more shortly. This enables you to provide an element of strategy into your attacks, and not only that, when you fall back on the back foot in combat, you can really get the upper hand by reassuring your teammates and thinking and providing a new strategy and a new outlook into the encounter. There's a lot of different ways in Xenoblade that it spices up combat and makes you think on your feet. I would say that this game, because I know that a lot of people have a certain type of feeling and feel a certain way about turn-based combat, is a good response to that type of game. It has many of those elements that you would find in a lot of the JRPG type of games that you would play. It has that rich story, environment, setting, and all those themes, but it doesn't really have that turn-based combat that does turn a lot of people off. So I would say Xenoblade, in a lot of ways, in combat-wise, is a good first game to get into if you're wanting to dip your feet into JRPGs. It still has the level of strategy that you could find in a lot of other JRPGs, but it allows you to move around. It isn't a hack and slash kind of game with some strategic elements like Kingdom Hearts or something like Final Fantasy 15. It is still more a strategy-based game where you are using and flicking through a set of abilities, but it relies more on positional combat to guide you and optimize the way that you take out particular enemies. And on top of all of that, the combat system in Xenoblade would lay out the groundwork for what we would see in later entries. It really was a basic template and format for Monolith Soft to build and evolve on. particularly with the way that we look at the effects on enemies. The bread and butter of combat in Xenoblade is trying to stagger and knock down your enemy as quick as possible, and then position yourself to output the most damage in hitting their critical spot. The ways you can do this is by applying different attacks that can break the enemy's defenses, and then you can use abilities such as toppling, which will knock them to the ground, and even other abilities that knock them into the air and then slam them back into the ground. There's different types of abilities in the game that can have different effects to really stagger your enemies, and then you can output and wail on them and do the most amount of damage possible. I would say that Xenoblade is the perfect first JRPG for someone looking to get into the series who isn't a big fan of turn-based combat in particular. The game has many different things where it isn't super dumbed down, it still has a lot of complexities, but I think it is very enticing to someone who may be deterred from trying something that is turn-based. It allows you as a player to remain independently thinking and in control and engaged in these encounters through the different use of positioning, status effects, and even the classes that are assigned to each different character. There are a lot of different things to focus on here, but I think that this would be a great way to ease your way into the JRPG genre per se if you are someone who's not particularly the biggest fan of that turn-based style. There is a lot here in Xenoblade to unpack, and it is constantly fun, and encounters always remain engaging throughout the later segments of the game. But now that we've talked about the staples of your moment-to-moment combat, where you have different classes, different effects, and different abilities, the ability to move around constantly, let's talk about the addition that is found in Xenoblade 1, which neatly ties into the story as well, and that is the use of visions. Okay, so visions. If there is one aspect of Xenoblade games that Monolith Soft never fails to nail, it is the marriage between narrative elements and the cohesion that it shares with its gameplay. And the first Xenoblade game is one of the best examples of this. The way that it does this is through the use of visions. So what are visions? Visions are insights that Shulk sees, telling him about an event that will occur in the future. Usually the death of someone he cares for, or someone getting trapped, something like that in the story. But this concept and mechanic isn't only explored through the story, but also has use during gameplay, as when fighting different foes whilst you ascend the Bionis, you will be provided with a vision during combat that will inform the player that during a combat encounter, Shulk or one of his teammates may become fatally wounded by an attack that the enemy is about to charge them with within a given time frame. This mechanic just further speaks to the ways that Xenoblade bends and breaks the mold of its roots of that traditional JRPG game, and these visions will enable you as Shulk to run up to a party member, inform them of an attack, and temporarily control that character, allowing a level of strategy still found in many turn-based games, but it's different here. And it allows you to cleverly position, move your characters, and use different abilities to prevent that attack from occurring. These visions are just one of the many mechanics that keep combat fresh, ironically enough, feeling unpredictable, and make you and your party members plan for some more particularly challenging encounters in the later half of the game. These visions are something that is really unique and I haven't really seen matched in another game. This level of cohesion is something that I've adored throughout the whole playthrough of Xenoblade 1. Once you inform someone of this particular vision that does occur, the next thing that'll take place is being able to use the abilities I mentioned earlier to stagger an enemy. Staggering an enemy will prevent them from being able to attack, therefore breaking the vision and changing the future, running with the broader theme of Xenoblade 1. It's overall just so astounding how they managed to come up with such a creative idea that blends so well and makes for a great story, but also makes for a great gameplay mechanic, and Xenoblade is full of great gameplay mechanics. The next mechanic that's introduced in Xenoblade is the reoccurring chain attacks, which have become a big thing in the Xeno series. So what is a chain attack? Well, I'd liken it to something like an all-out attack if you've ever played Persona, but chain attacks are a bit more interactive in that respect. So here in Xenoblade, you control each party member and synergize your attacks, trying to chain and combo each attack together to see how long you can keep that attack going, threading each attack into each other to try and deal and output the most damage to the enemy as possible. These combos allow you and your team to coordinate and apply the highest output level of damage to an enemy. However, it does come with its own risk, as the ability to execute a chain attack is tied to this party meter, which you'll see as 3 bars in the top left corner. So this party meter allows you to also revive fallen teammates. So there is this level of playing offensive and defensive that occurs here when you are participating in a combat encounter in Xenoblade. If you are versing a fairly challenging enemy, you may want to conserve that party meter just in case one of your teammates gets downed. However, you might want to risk it all for the opportunity to really just output a lot of damage and knock down your enemy. But when facing a formidable foe, you really do have to play and keep these things in mind, and it's an extra level of strategy on top of many of the other mechanics that I've mentioned prior. So it really is juggling and finding this balancing act of knowing when to play offensive and defensive along with the other plethora of mechanics that I've just mentioned earlier. It's all these things when they come together and synergize that makes this combat loop within Xenoblade feel really fun, refreshing, and just holds up throughout that long lengthy playtime that you would expect from a JRPG. And it makes going back and discovering new areas, encounters, and enemies all the more fun even in the later hours. Among the many different aspects of Xenoblade's core combat, there is one that I'm still yet to cover, and that is the Monado's abilities. So the Monado itself has a set of abilities that work like an ultimate ability for sure, and there are different abilities that work under different purposes. So one example of this is the armor ability, which will protect your teammates from taking a lot of damage. There is also the speed buff. This art allows for the member of the party that has been applied the buff to have a higher evasion, meaning that they're more likely to dodge any particular attack that comes their way. This is an ever-evolving mechanic throughout Xenoblade Chronicles, and each Xenoblade game has one particular mechanic and thing that they emphasize, which works in harmony with the overall story and theme and centralized aspect. So for Xenoblade 1, that being the Monado. And the Monado is a ever-evolving sword with new abilities that unlock as you progress through the story, meaning with each new story event and thing that unfolds, you'll have more abilities and ways to approach different enemies. It's great, and it keeps this mechanic of the game feeling fresh throughout the whole game and gives you new ways to adapt to new enemies and synergize with your party. I think it's really clever and cool, and it's just another example of what I stated earlier when I said that they are really good, Monolith Soft, at merging the concepts and themes and storyline of Xenoblade along with its combat and making them work in harmony with each other. So the Monado's abilities and the ever-evolving sword along with the visions just make this cohesive kind of feeling that comes really well with the story. And I adore it, man. It's so good, and it's something that will follow suit in every sequential Xenoblade game after, and they really just make it so great here with using the Monado and all the different abilities that are available. The approach that Xenoblade takes with regards to progression provides a lot of depth in its systems that it has implemented to tailor your characters to your liking. There are two main mechanisms for evolving and building your character, the first of which is the ability to level up your arts. Each ability available to the party members can be upgraded to a particular threshold using ability points. These are acquired through defeating foes and also discovering locations. You can pull these points together to level up different abilities of your choosing for each character. Throughout your playthrough, you will inevitably reach a threshold with one or many particular arts where you will have to get them leveled up to a new threshold where you can have a new set of level ups that you can do to strengthen your arts further. The way that you do this is through purchasing book upgrades for each particular art, and these books can be purchased by particular vendors found throughout different cities in the universe of the Bionis and the Mechonis. It's a pretty straightforward system and one you're used to. Kill stuff, you get points, and then you can level up your abilities. I feel the books are implemented in a way that provides you a new skill set that can keep you feeling like you're ever evolving throughout the game and not jumping ahead or becoming too over-leveled too fast with all your arts. Overall, the art system is pretty cool, and there's a lot of different abilities to pick and choose from when leveling up, so you'll never find yourself too over-leveled or that you've maxed everything out too early. This is just the one system, and this is a lot more of the simpler system, I would say, but this second method for leveling up your party and sense of progression is the really cool one where I feel like a lot of the synergy that you can implement starts to come into play. So the second method is leveling up your party through different skill trees. Like in many games, each party member will have a skill tree. However, here in Xenoblade, the trees are broken down into 3 branches, and the more you engage with each branch, the further the skills of that branch will unlock. Another cool feature of this skill system is the ability to share skills acquired with one party member with other party members. This is what's known as a skill link. You can execute a skill link by using a currency called Affinity Coins, which are acquired when defeating unique foes that are out in the wild. The more useful a skill is, the more affinity coins it'll cost to give another party member that skill. But this system works in perfect unison with many of the other systems of Xenoblade, providing an added layer of flexibility and synergy to form a strong party formation. It makes the skill unlocks and allocations feel more meaningful as well, as it makes everything that you're doing, whether it's the main story or the side content, feel worthwhile. Not to mention that there's 3 skill trees in the beginning, but as you unlock certain quests later in the game and do particular activities and triggers, you will unlock 3 additional trees for each party member, meaning that there will be a total of 6 trees with their own assortment of skills by the end of the game for you to synergize, mix and match, and tailor each party member to based on how you want them to play. I think this system has a lot of depth and there is a lot to do, and it adds a lot of mileage and hours to the game, particularly if you're doing all the additional side content and also working that in and factoring that with leveling up each city's affinity, leveling up your arts, and also just trying to unlock the best armor and craft the best gems. So there's always something that is all feeding into these different systems, making everything that you are doing in this game feel so worthwhile. Okay, so now we've discussed many of the different combat aspects of Xenoblade Chronicles. I want to dive more into the game systems, as Xenoblade Chronicles has one of the best worlds to explore. Its world building and world design is so vast and amazing to just get lost in. It has some really unique and cleverly crafted world building, and I think that's in large part due to just how diverse the ecosystems feel, but more importantly how different each town feels and the inhabitants of those towns. But on top of that, I mean, many other games have that all in place, but I think where Xenoblade differs is ultimately through how they make you interact with these towns, and they do it so perfectly with a well-crafted system known as the Affinity System. The way that this system works is for each different city or town that you go to, there'll be a number of different people that you can interact with that are important people. And you'll also notice just random civilians walking through the town and throughout each major city that you can interact with, and some give out quests and give you different adventures to go and set out on. Through completing these quests and helping many different people in each of these towns, you'll deepen your bonds and relationship with each of these respective communities. And you'll be able to see this visually reflected on the affinity chart, which shows each relationship between different people within the town and the relationship with your party, which is reflected through a star rating from 1 to 5. It really is a great system, and it's super practical because it gives you a good way and sense of feeling to help interact with many of the different people in each of these communities and get to know many different side characters and make them feel important in their own way. It makes many of the side adventures and quests feel correlated to an overarching little story within each town. Some of them are very fetch questy and forgettable, but there are a few little interesting side quests here and there that you can take part in. It is good and it is a great system, and this was the very first building block in the Xenoblade series, and they just evolve on it more and more as things progress. But this here, with how they've done it in Xenoblade 1, is still one of the best iterations that I've seen, and it's just great. As you interact with many different people in each of these towns, see many of the different relationships form and improve as you make an influence on the world around you. But not only that, it's a clever system for incorporating both side content and world building into one cohesive merge. Like, think about it for a second. It enables you, the player, to interact with many NPCs that in most games when you run around a town are just, one line of dialogue and very uninteresting, and they're just there as fodder to make the town not feel like it's empty. Here in Xenoblade, it provides a reason to go to these towns, interact with many different NPCs, and also brings it to life and makes it feel like there are actual characters and people living in all these different places, and you can see the reflection of your actions. But not only that, it allows you to go and set off into different places within each of these zones that the main story might not take you towards. So when you think about it, it works in a way that allows you to properly go out and delve into the different vast world of Xenoblade and explore the Bionis at your leisure and find many different mysteries that are hidden around each corner of this world, and also allows you to deepen your relationship and have a sense of familiarity with both the people and place when returning to these towns. It really is a clever system, and I wish more games would do this type of stuff. I'm a real sucker for going to like a major hub area and seeing the reflection of your actions really actually make a difference in games. It's really like cool to just complete a bunch of quests and then be like, oh cool, I did something, but it's really something else to see things actually take form and change, and Xenoblade does this so well. You can see relationships change, you can see the actual world around you change, and it is great. Another aspect that really brings this game and world to life is the day and night cycle of this game and how it works with interacting with many of these different NPCs. So you could go to a particular area at a certain time of day, and you can check when people are available on the Affinity chart, by the way, but you can go to a certain area and you could see someone and talk to them, and they can give you a quest or they could update you on something, and then if you go there at night, they might not be there. They have a routine and a cycle of when they're at a different place and when they're not. It really is cool because it makes you feel like, although it can be an illusion in some ways, that these people do have a life, a routine, and they're available at different times, and it's another little neat trick to just bring the world of Xenoblade to life. These people have interactions with their own community, different people around them. They have routines, times when they're available and not available, times like they have different needs, requirements and things, and the world around them expands as well. And it is just, the quests themselves, they're not that special. They are pretty fetch questy and standard stuff, but it's this way that the world expands when completing these little mundane quests that is the real satisfaction, not just completing the actual little fodder quest itself. And I do think that it is a cool and clever blueprint that I haven't really seen many people emulate or do as well as this game does. And it really is a huge highlight to me, and I love it. And I really think it brings the world of the Bionis and the world of Xenoblade 1 to life and makes it such a memorable universe. As I mentioned earlier in this video, one thing that Monolith Soft wanted to emphasize when developing Xenoblade Chronicles was its focus on a story-rich narrative and characters you care for. One way that they achieve this is through these moments called heart-to-hearts. These moments are interactions that will play out between two or more characters who will share and exchange about many different things, from interests, memories, and introspective reflection. They put the player in the seat of one of their party members, needing to answer a question, offer advice or comfort, leveling up the affinity between these two party members. Which ties into the next component of the affinity system. It isn't just towns and the people within them that share an affinity on this chart. Still, there is also an affinity within the party that depicts how close each party member is to one another. And the closer two party members are, the more of these heart-to-hearts you can take place in. But not only that, the more synergized each party member will be throughout the combat in the game too. Combat and gifts are two great ways that party affinity can be raised in the game as well, and it works so cleverly within the rules of Xenoblade that they have set up here, with its visions and forms of companionship that it builds amongst its party members. How it operates within combat is through warning party members of an attack, encouraging them when morale is low, and battling and helping them up when they're fallen. These are all methods within combat that can boost affinity. Another method that you can do to raise the affinity between two party members is by giving them gifts from the many different items that you'll pick up in the world. They'll have a different positive or negative effect depending on which party member likes which certain thing. And then once you've unlocked many of these different levels of the affinity and closeness, you'll be able to engage with more heart-to-hearts between two particular party members, and answering questions right within these heart-to-hearts will only further bolster that connection between these two party members. It really is a great and rational framework, and again, it's a testament to just how much thought has gone into weaving many of the different aspects and systems of Xenoblade into its cohesive story and making it all one tight, comprehensive package. In Xenoblade, Like with many RPGs, you'll be on a quest to acquire new gear and equipment to increase your stats and make your party members look fantastic, dripped out and cool. So there's a ton of customization for a game that's over 10 years old, let's just put that out there. And the definitive edition has only streamlined and improved these systems with more options and a modern UI system to make everything feel a lot more comprehensive and to the point. Your armor that you equipped to different characters will apply a variety of boons, but will also come with a varying range of empty sockets for gems. What are gems? Well, like in many loot-based games, gems are modifiers that you equip to your gear to give you different stat increases depending on the type of party member that you are playing as. So these will enhance your gear and allow you different ways to strengthen your build for each particular party member to your liking and tailor them to be as effective as possible. So if you are wanting a character to not be as toppled and knocked down as easy, you'll apply a resist gem for that particular type of buff or resistance to a debuff, and so on and things of that nature. You can craft many gems through minerals, which can be found at deposits throughout the whole world of the Bionis. These minerals will then allow you to begin crafting. You can bring these items and minerals to the mobile furnace that is found in Colony 9. Then you can select 2 party members and have them synergize together to produce the best version of a particular gem. There are 2 roles you choose for these party members, one being the shooter, who provides a unique ability to the current gem craft, and the engineer, who is the one who handles the flame. You then select the minerals you'll be choosing from a particular tier and quality of minerals that reflect the quality of the produced gem. This synergy will also work in conjunction with the party members' affinity, which we discussed earlier here in the section about heart-to-hearts and the party member affinity. So the closer that each party member is to one another means that the better they'll work when crafting gems. So a higher affinity also has a benefit in the crafting aspect of this game. A higher affinity isn't just rewarding for the shooter and the engineer, but also additional party members that aren't either of those roles, as a higher affinity will then mean that other party members will cheer you on when crafting and boost the performance. So what's a good performance even mean? Well, there's a percentage that you'll see that's going higher and higher when you are handling the flame, and this produces particular benefits, where the ideal goal is to at least get it over 100%. 100% will yield the reward of the particular gem that you are chasing. So for example, if you are trying to get a critical attack gem that is in the level 2 bracket, getting 100% will reward you with that gem. Pretty straightforward. However, there is higher percentages that will yield better rewards from better performance, of course. So the first tier is getting it over the 200% bracket. This will level up your gem. So if you're going for a tier 2 critical attack, this will level it up to a tier 3. And then there's a third bracket, which is getting it over 300%. That will not only level up that gem you're chasing to the next tier, but it will split it into 2. So if you're chasing that critical attack level 2, it'll go to a tier 3 and it will reward you with 2 of those gems. Again, it is another aspect of Xenoblade that just interlocks with many of the other components, making everything kind of flow together and feel rewarding. The fact that you can have affinity with different members better benefit the way that you craft gems, and an interactive gem crafting experience that better results in having the best possible gems equipped to your character. It's just overall really cool, and I haven't really seen many games try to replicate what Xenoblade does in this approach. Even other Xenoblade games haven't done the similar approach to crafting that Xenoblade 1 did. It is a bit to get your head around at first just how exactly it works, but it isn't too complicated once you get the hang of it, and it's a pretty clever and cool system that I enjoyed frankly throughout my playthrough of this game. One aspect of Xenoblade Chronicles that I feel is unrivaled amongst many other JRPGs in particular is its approach to open world design. It does make a world that feels large and sprawling, but is able to bring it to life with its diverse assortments of wildlife that inhabit each area so perfectly. The day and night cycles that allow you to use and see different areas and wildlife, and the musical pieces that accompany it, and the tonal shifts that occur during these cycles are what make it so damn perfect to just explore and live within this world. On top of that, it is crazy how many little hidden locations there are throughout these areas, how many different races and factions you'll get to meet and interact with. It all melds so well together. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of work went into designing the locations of Xenoblade and ensuring that each location was logical with considerations to the positioning of the Bionis. In terms of level design, Xenoblade was ahead of its time, providing many areas full of depth and verticality and realistic environments that felt felt more real than gamey. I'd say a large portion of the success here in Xenoblade with their environment's verticality and design layout harkens back to the original Xenogears. As I mentioned earlier, the original Xenogears was an original concept that was pitched for Final Fantasy VII, and this is a good little contrast between both games here, where a decision really had to be made. So, are we going to prioritize 3D sprites and 2D environments, or 3D environments and 2D sprites? What ended up happening was Final Fantasy VII would be a game with 3D sprites in 2D environments, whereas Xenogears was focused around 2D sprites in 3D environments. This provided a lot of benefits to the team at Monolith Soft later down the line, as working on Xenogears would give them a head start in working in 3D environments that many other games at that time weren't really doing. And I believe that it's paid off in spades here with the type of levels and worlds that they've been able to craft and the way that they've been able to optimize such extensive games on hardware like the Nintendo Switch. You look at Xenoblade 1 through 3 and wonder how they get these games running, and the fact that they've worked on even larger projects like Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom more recently and been able to make those games optimized and playable really means that they know their stuff and what they're doing when it comes to optimizing and developing 3D worlds, whether they're working on it as a support team or it's their main game. But back to Xenoblade 1, there is another example that I'd like to point out of how this game brings its worlds to life. A lot of RPGs have this tendency to really make areas feel gamey, where each area will be filled with people relative to different level spans. Xenoblade does have that to some extent, but one thing that I really do like about it is even in the starting zones, you'll look around and you'll see just wildlife, like a big ape or a big like giraffe looking creature that is like level 80 just walking around, and I mean, you can try and fight it, but it will just roll through you if you attempt to attack it. It is meant to just be like a force of nature. It's like just not gamey in any sense. It's creates this sense of like a real living world in a way. You aren't meant to fight them, they're meant to be intimidating, and don't get me wrong, there is an idea of a general level of progression per area, and there should be, otherwise the game wouldn't have a proper flow, but it doesn't just feel like you're level gated area to area. It feels like there's the general level, but a sense of wildlife and a apex in each area that is like a threat that keeps you on your toes and brings the world to life in a unique way based on those environments. And a lot of these level 80 plus enemies that you'll see really do represent those particular environments. It's this collective of variables that really just make the overall Xenoblade experience and traveling through this world so memorable and so enthralling. Each new area is just littered with a great soundtrack, a diverse pool of different types of enemies and wildlife to really get familiar with that really flesh out and feel like they belong in the area that they populate. It feels like you are moving habitat to habitat throughout this world of the Bionis. So, whilst we're on the topic of exploration and discovery in Xenoblade, let's talk about the next new addition that has been added in the definitive edition of Xenoblade Chronicles 1, and that is the collectibles. So, whilst you are exploring many different areas of the Bionis, you'll encounter different items and wildlife and things that you'll pick up. So these collectibles can be added and stamped into what is called the Collectopedia. These are in different categories. They can span from vegetables, insects, parts, or other things that you pick up in many different areas in the Bionis. You'll be tasked with collecting a variety of these different items for a particular area, and then be rewarded with items such as gems, weapons, or other useful additions, even cosmetics sometimes. It's nothing insane, but it is a nice little additional feature to the experience, and something I'd imagine would make the game fresh in some ways for fans returning that have played the original. And this is a nice little addition to the main game, but there is one big core new feature for returning fans that is found in Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition, and that of course is the epilogue expansion, Future Connected, and that is what we'll be talking about next. Next, we'll be diving into Xenoblade Chronicles expansion called Future Connected, which serves as a send-off and an epilogue to the story of Xenoblade Chronicles. It takes place as a side adventure that follows both Shulk and Melia as they are exploring and their ship is struck down by an unknown enemy. The story will see our heroes, alongside their Nopon friends, explore the Bionis' shoulder. The story and expansion should run you about 6 to 12 hours depending on how you track and how much of the side content you engage with. Now we'll briefly touch on the exploration and combat of Future Connected. So here it mostly remains intact from what the base game is, with many reoccurring combat features of the main game present here. However, a few changes have been taken to the combat format. First and foremost, there are no visions in this expansion for obvious reasons, but also chain attacks are replaced with a new form of attack known as a charge attack, which we'll discuss in a bit. So how these charge attacks work is tied to one of Future Connected's clever side activities and mechanics in the game, and that is the prospectors. So prospectors, they are these Nopon that are scattered across the Bionis' shoulder that have a side quest for you. But once you complete that task for them, they will join by your side and help you in battle. There is a total of 12 Nopon prospectors that you could find that'll help you, and once you complete that particular task that they want. But where they are useful is with the flag that they bear and carry with them. So there's 3 different colors that you will see for a prospector, and these are categorized into 3 different types of attacks that they will do. These colors are broken into blue, yellow, and red, and respectively blue being healing, red being damage, and yellow being staggering. So based on these prospectors and the more of them that you have in one of these 3 groups, you will be able to do a charge attack in battle using a particular form of attack that is color coded to represent the group you'll be using, and then they can either stagger the enemy, heal your party, or do an all-out attack where they do a lot of damage. It makes, when playing the Future Connected expansion, really detouring and doing the side quests feel worth it, because it makes encounters a lot easier. Is it a necessity to complete the game? Not really, but there are a lot of them that you will just find along the way, and a lot of what they ask you to do isn't really too crazy, so just getting them out of the way and building up your prospector army and a nice little activity that differentiates the Future Connected experience from the main experience. The exploration itself is pretty cool. The Bionis' shoulder is a pretty reasonably sized area, but it ultimately just feels like one zone out of Xenoblade 1 because that ultimately is what it is. In comparison to many of the future expansions that we would see in the Xenoblade series, I would say this one is a little bit shorter in all respects, but it isn't bad by any stretch. It is just a little epilogue chapter, and its story itself will just run you a short period of time, and it's a nice way to just wrap up the whole Xenoblade 1 experience. It feels like a nice little side story. Whilst not essential, it does tie a few things and set up a few things with the broader universe, but it is a nice way to just wrap up the overall experience of Xenoblade 1. If there is one thing that sells how incredible these environments are, it is how amazing both the environmental design and how perfect the soundtrack for Xenoblade is. Seriously, some of these environments are complete 180 when switching from day to night regarding their atmosphere and overall presence. This can be primarily attributed to just how incredible the music is, accompanying with the surreal visuals. It's important to mention that Xenoblade, there are 2 versions of each location's theme, one for the day and one for the night. It's a perfect recipe, with the day versions of the song feeling energetic and kicking you off ready to go, and the night themes providing a more relaxing, unwinding theme after a long day's work. It is brilliant, and all these different themes and key musical pieces that play out throughout the cutscenes are so fitting, providing and heightening the moments of many of these scenes throughout the game. The voice actors too are incredible. The performances here are stellar. I liked Adam Howden's performance as Shulk and Jay Taylor's performance as Ryan in particular. Seriously, it's always Ryan time for me, man. In the aspects of sound and visuals, as I stated earlier, if there's one area of the game that Xenoblade just absolutely nails, it's its exploration, but this is really elevated just by how beautiful its environments and world are to explore, and how stellar its soundtrack is to really enthrall you and have you get lost within this world. It's one of the reasons why when you look back on your experience with the game, you immediately feel like you want to go back, like revisiting a place you haven't been to in a while. And that's because these environments feel like they are living and breathing, and there is a certain sense of nostalgia with the sound and music and the absolute feeling of traversing each of these locations. And that is rare to come by in a video game. To tie this video together, Xenoblade Chronicles has become one of the most memorable and influential JRPGs I've had the pleasure of experiencing in the past few years. It's only growing in popularity with each release, and I can totally understand why. It's a game that has managed to stand out amongst many of its contemporaries for its beautiful worlds that feel lived in, and its ability to tackle a ton of darker and more philosophical themes that was pioneered by Xenogears all those years ago and where its following began. The beauty for me with Xenoblade is the ride that you take, the experience. From the first setting foot into Colony 9's Shulk to where you end up at the end, it is a totally exciting experience and an evolution, not just of the habitat, the world and the biomas, but of the characters, the party and the bonds that you form. This game is quite an unforgettable experience, and if you're willing to stick along with the ride, I'm more than sure that you will be satisfied. Xenoblade is a game that always stays engaging and captivates you, with its lovable cast of characters, thought-provoking themes, and innovative gameplay. Its gameplay will always keep you on your feet, and there is a lot of different mechanics and combat systems that all interlock into each other so perfectly that make you feel like no matter what you're doing, you are always progressing, and make exploring many of these gorgeous environments feel like a treat rather than a chore. Speaking of these environments, they are so beautifully realized with an unforgettable soundtrack that makes no matter what time of day feel impactful. The different orchestral pieces to the more rock-inspired action moments is a great diversity that is pulled from each individual moment that fits so well in this game. And Xenoblade's soundtrack is one that I still listen to on repeat to this day. It's a game that pulls you in and keeps you hooked till the very end. All in all, this game ultimately made me a huge fan and is the beginning of a multi-part journey where I will be discussing and embarking on the whole Xenoblade trilogy and exploring this series on this channel. With that being said, yes, I do love Xenoblade and I will be talking more about it here on the channel, so if you are a fan of that and you did like this video, consider subbing or liking, whatever you feel like doing, and yeah, keep an eye out because I will be covering both Xenoblade 2, Torna, and the third game going forward, and I will want to be covering many of the main games here on this channel because I do think this series is a great series and I really want to show it some love. So I hope that you've enjoyed this video, and if you've made it this far, I would love to see you stick around and maybe consider subbing. But anyways, thanks for sticking around and watching this today, and have a great day. I'll catch you guys in the next one.